To you, James.
Thank you, Toby. Hello, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I know we're getting close to drinks here. I'll try to keep this at a high level for you. Let me ask a question. How many of you, in connection with the work you do, have to deal with lawyers? How many of you actually enjoy working with lawyers?
I don't mind it.
Not so many, a couple, but that's good. It's good to know there's a few fans out there. One of the reasons that people that are creative like you, that are trying to do innovative things, don't like working with lawyers is because they tell you what you can't do. There are certain bounds on what you can do and what you can't do, and really the focus is try to help you accomplish what you want to do, but avoid legal issues. And so trying to find that right balance is really kind of where we help focus, and particularly in the areas where I'm going to talk about. Gamification is kind of a subset or a sister subset, if you will, of gamification, as we'll see in a second. There's some really interesting and creative things that are being done. There's also some potential legal pitfalls. I'm going to try to highlight what some of those are during the talk here. So we all know what gamification is. Gamification is a kind of a play on words of gamification, and it really is kind of the leveraging of gambling mechanics for non-gambling purposes. As many of you are probably aware, there's an awful lot of activity going on and people making a lot of money in social gaming, using social games for non-real money gambling, meaning you can play a game, you can't really win money, but the companies are actually monetizing that pretty well in a variety of ways. And then there's also the real money gambling. So there has been recent legislation that's permitting certain types of online gambling to be legalized on a state-by-state basis right now. But in that area, it's regulated, so you have to be licensed. You can't just do an online poker game for real money. You have to go through licensing steps, and you can only do it where it's legal. So the concept of leveraging gamification is trying to figure out how to stay out of the real money gambling realm and how to do it in a way you can actually make some money and it's interesting for users and avoid the legal problems that go along with the online gambling. So just at a high level, this is a loose definition of gambling, but I want to highlight just a couple of pieces in this. Generally, gambling is staking or risking something of value on some uncertain event that if the event occurs, you may win something else of value. Now note, the definition doesn't say money, but clearly if I bet you some money and on the outcome of some event and it happens and I'm right and you pay me money, that's a form of gambling because it's money in, there's risk, and there's money out. But there's many other types of things that constitute value, and that's what I want to really focus on a little bit today, mostly non-monetary items such as virtual goods, virtual currencies, points, and some of the other things that are relevant to what all of you are doing. The other thing to understand is that while there's a whole set of laws regarding what is gambling, there's another set of laws, mostly state laws, that focus on contests, sweepstakes, and lotteries, which is, in many cases, if you do something that's an illegal lottery, it's also illegal gambling, but not always. The difference is essentially this. So there's three elements that are really important from a legal analysis when you're looking at these issues. The first one is consideration. And consideration generally means, is the user putting up something of value? Again, whether it's money or something else. We'll come back to that in a second. The second element is there chance? So is the outcome of whether the user is going to win a prize determined by chance or by something else? And I'll focus on that in a second too. And then the last one, is there a prize? And a prize is, in this context means, again, anything of value, right? It can be a monetary prize, it could be a car, it could be an iPad, it could be anything that's a tangible item. But in some cases, it can also be intangible, such as virtual goods, virtual currencies, and that's where some of the interesting legal issues come up. So the short rule of thumb here is, in general, running a lottery is illegal. Right? Under most state laws, you cannot run a lottery. Only the state lottery agency can do it. Private lotteries, with certain exceptions for nonprofits, are illegal. So to avoid being an illegal lottery, you have to eliminate one of these three components. You either have to get rid of consideration, or chance, or prize, or more than one of them, but at least one. So what's a contest? A contest is like a lottery, with the exception of chance. A contest is generally a skill-based event. So it's okay to charge to have someone enter an event if the outcome is determined based on skill and you're awarding a prize. Right? So many tournaments that are skill-based tournaments have an entry fee and there's a prize, and those are generally okay, and that's what a contest is. Sweepstakes, on the other hand, generally is chance-based and there's a prize, and so the way you avoid making those illegal is to avoid consideration, which means, again, the user does not put up anything of value to get that chance to win the prize. And the last one, which I'm going to call other for now, but I want you to kind of keep this one in mind, is you can have consideration and chance but no prize. Let me ask you this. If I designed a game and I said, pay me some money for a chance to win nothing, would you play? How many want to play? Not too many people, right? Doesn't sound too interesting. Maybe, maybe not. We'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so just real briefly to kind of go down through these elements, skill versus chance. While the same terms are used throughout the different state statutes on lotteries and contests and sweepstakes, the states interpret this differently. For most of what you guys will be doing, this is not a big issue, but in some states, skill is pretty clear. If it's a puzzle-solving contest or a speed or endurance contest, that's going to be skill. Chance, if you're picking random numbers like in bingo or lottery, that's clearly going to be clearly chance. The first one was clearly skill. And there's a lot in between. So how many of you think poker is a game of skill versus a game of chance? Right? There's an element of both, right? So, and there's a lot of different activities where the outcome may rely on some skill on your part, but it also would be chance and random elements. And that's where this part of the test gets a little bit murky. I'm not going to focus too much on that today. Where I'm going to focus primarily is value, because this is something that's very relevant to what many of you are doing. Clearly, if a user is putting money in, that's something of value. And if you're giving them a prize that's money or tangible goods, there's something of value there. So those cases are relatively uninteresting and pretty straightforward. Question is, if you have a point system or a virtual currency system, or yes, if you're using Bitcoin in some way, when do those have value, right? And there's a number of factors that go into determining whether a virtual good to virtual currency have value. And it's very fact specific. It depends on how does the user acquire the points, right? So in many cases, people are acquiring points based on activities. So they're not actually putting money in. Believe it or not, some states say that if a user has to go through great lengths and spend considerable time or engage in providing significant amounts of information about themselves in order to get points, that actually some states have held that that's actually a user giving value. So value, one principle is that it's not just money. More relevant and kind of the more common example that you guys will face is under what circumstances can virtual currency or points have value from a redemption perspective. So, you know, the issues here, you generally have what's called open loop and closed loop types of virtual currency systems. Closed loop, generally speaking, means that the entity that awards the points, you can redeem those points with that entity for goods or services or part of the game or the program that you are participating in. That's generally at a very high level a closed loop system. Open loop systems are an entity awards points, and you can actually redeem those points either for cash or for third-party goods, right? That's very loose definition, but just to give you a sense of the concept. Generally, if you're going to be able to redeem your points outside of the system that you got them, it's going to be open loop, and those points will likely be deemed to have value. So why is that relevant? If you have a game design where you use virtual points and that you award people, and they can use those points to enter a contest or have a chance of winning something else, which is a technique that many companies are using these days, depending how you design that program, that actually may be legally problematic. Okay, so it's important to understand, and there's many different aspects of these virtual currency systems. There's dual currency models where sometimes users can only earn certain points, but they can also buy other points. Sometimes users can earn or buy the same points. And that can drive whether or not there's value. If a user can buy points and then redeem them for a chance to win something, again, there's probably going to be deemed to be user consideration, and you may not get around the three-factor test. The other thing that's kind of an area that is particularly more relevant with games, although it's relevant with other virtual currency platforms as well, is whether there's a secondary market. We all know for most of the games, you could buy and sell characters, you can buy and sell virtual goods, virtual currency, even though the game rules say you can't do that. And in fact, most of the game rules will say if you get caught doing it, we'll shut down your account. The reality is most games don't do it. But if there's an established market for virtual currency or virtual goods and people are willing to pay a price for those items, that may enter into the equation as to whether or not those items actually have value. So this is a really complex area that we spend a lot of time dealing with this and helping companies really understand the issues that go on with this. And I'll come back to some other points on this in a second. But one thing I want to just note, for any of you who are dealing with virtual currency, FinCEN, which is a federal agency that deals with issues involving virtual currency and other financial matters, recently came out with guidance about 2 weeks ago or so, a little bit longer than that now, time flies. And they've clearly stated that virtual currency and decentralized virtual currencies like Bitcoin are subject to many of the financial regulations that exist, particularly things dealing with what's called money transmitter services or MSBs. And generally what that is that if you're holding something of value, right, whether it's pre-stored value, people prepay for points, or other forms of stored value that may be transmitted to a third party in connection, so if you have an open loop system, for example, there's a whole series of federal regulations that apply to you. I can tell you right now, many of the companies we deal with don't comply with this. And these guidelines were issued with a statement saying that they're being issued because they're getting ready to engage in a number of enforcements, and they wanted there to be clear guidance and for people to have time to understand at least how the feds are interpreting these positions. So if you're dealing with any of the types of issues that I talked about, and you're not clear about whether what you're doing is permissible or not, it's a good time to consult with an attorney who's knowledgeable about that. So let me give you a couple examples of gamification. This is one that I think is kind of interesting. How many of you are familiar with Cash Dazzle? This is essentially like an offer wall type approach. You can engage in certain actions, whether it's downloading an app or forwarding emails to, giving emails, friends' email addresses, or any of the types of things that, offer walls engage in. But instead of getting a fixed reward for doing that, what you get is you get spins. You get spins of a wheel, all right? And that's kind of the gamification piece, right? So you get to spin a wheel that has different dollar amounts on it and a couple of, loser spots. And when you spin the wheel, you get actual cash amount from this. Now, in this situation, generally, right, there's not going to be, it's not a problem because the user's not putting money or something of value in, provided the actions don't kind of cross the line into something that's too extensive. But it's a very interesting technique. It's become pretty popular. And tying it to gamification, they have leaderboards too, right? So people who win the most money get kind of listed up on the leaderboard. So this is I think a very simple design that shows kind of the combination of gamification and gamification. How many of you have heard of Kampugacha? Kampugacha is a technique that's used, was used until recently in many Japanese games. There were at least 4 major public companies that were all using this technique, and they were generating a significant amount of money from this. What Kampugacha is, it's kind of like, the McDonald's, the Monopoly sweepstakes they do, where you go and you buy a hamburger and you get a little game piece, and most of the game pieces are pretty easy to get. There's always that one that's kind of hard to complete the set. That's kind of what Kampugacha is. In this case, what it is that within different games, you pay money to buy virtual goods. Now, what makes this interesting from a legal perspective is there's not a chance you'll get the goods. You will always get a virtual good for the payment of the money that you make. The question is, which virtual good will you get? There's an element of randomness there. So what the company said is that you're always getting, let's say you paid $3 for a virtual good, you always get a good worth at least $3, but you might get something that's worth more. All right? And then on top of that, if you get a complete set, there's predefined sets of goods, and if you complete a set, then you get some super rare virtual good that you can't even buy that's worth a lot of money. Now, what's interesting here is that a couple of things. One is the Japanese regulators ended up shutting this down. And there's a good argument that what they were doing was not necessarily illegal, because there's many situations where users buy something and get a chance to win something. We've seen it, McDonald's and many other promotions are like that. And if you use what's called a free alternative means of entry, and you don't even require someone to purchase the Big Mac or whatever it is, then there's a good argument there's no consideration from the user, and it should be a valid sweepstakes. The problem that they ran into was that it was more of a situation where they didn't really get, while the regulators said this could be gambling, they actually came after them under a consumer fairness approach. And what was happening was, instead of having like fixed odds of how many of these random game pieces would be there to complete a set, they were basically using very sophisticated data analytics, like many of you probably use, to figure out just how far could we push people, how much money could we get them to spend before they would complain. And they pushed them too far. And too many consumers complained, and the regulators basically went after this approach and basically said you have to stop doing it. Probably could have been avoided if they had disclosed the odds more clearly and they had more of a fixed mechanism for doing it. But just to show you the magnitude of how significant this was, one of the companies, which was publicly traded, lost 20% of its market cap in one day by losing this revenue stream. So, you know, there's very powerful techniques that can be used around this, but if not done right, it can be pretty disastrous results. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit. Let me come back to what I said earlier about, you know, would you play the game? If I said you pay me money, you get a chance to win nothing. That's what Zynga Poker does, right? Zynga generates an incredible amount of money. You pay real money for virtual poker chips. You play poker, and you can't cash the chips out, right? So how do they make that interesting? Part of it is, again, the gamification. People want to play poker. They want to be like the, you know, the top dog and accumulate more chips. And through leaderboards and other things to show that your stack is bigger than some other guy's stack. I did say stack. You know, that's a technique that they use. And so that this technique is being used in a lot of ways combined with gamification to extract pretty good monetization. So just a couple key takeaways, and then I'll be done. You guys can get drinks. The first one is, with all of these kind of very innovative and forward-thinking approaches, more often than not, you're going to be able to do what you want to do, or at least get close to doing what you want to do. And it's really helpful to consult with an attorney on the front end of that. We have many times we'll have clients come to us and say, we're launching this sweepstakes tomorrow, can you just sign off on it? That's not a good time to find out that you have a problem, you need to kind of slightly redesign it. So, you know, consult early on that. The other thing, and the Japan, the Kampu Gacha, one of the other reasons I put that up there is that one of the things that we hear all the time is that, as we all know, once something works, right, and everyone hears the case studies that are working, and they're saying that's great, we have to go do that too. People copy what other people do that's successful. That's just what happens. When someone comes and says, well, we want to do this, and we explain that maybe a potential legal issue with it, a lot of times we get is, well, they're doing it, so it must be okay. Right? The fact that someone else is doing it doesn't mean it's legal. It just means that if there's an enforcement, you're probably all going to go down at once, just like happened with the Kampu Gacha. Oops, sorry. I lost that. So the last point that was up there is that there's a lot of gray area, right? Some of this stuff, like I mentioned with the skill and chance, right? There's you know, there's things that are clearly legal, things that are clearly illegal. You know, part of this, the balance in trying to find the right legal approach is how much risk are you willing to take? Do you want to be the test case if the regulators come, or do you want to be more in the safe zone? And trying to, you know, work and understand what the ramifications are can be very helpful to do that up front to minimize your risk. So real quick, there's a couple other kind of legal issues I'm just going to touch on in kind of more rapid fire that are important to think about. One is terms of service, right? Most people don't really think much about terms of service, think they're kind of boilerplate documents. If you're dealing with issues like this, a lot of legal issues, like the Kampu Gacha ones, can be avoided by clear disclosures. Now, we know that users aren't going to read them. It doesn't really matter. It's not about the readers. It's about if the regulators look at this and they're trying to see, you know, are you at least disclosing things, and are you doing what you say you disclose, it can actually really help you from a legal perspective. Second issue is intellectual property. One of the things that we see all the time, and as I mentioned, as we all know, there's a lot of copying there. A lot of these novel game mechanics, whether it's the gamification mechanics, or just game elements in general, the functional aspects of what you're doing, if you come up with new techniques, these are protectable by patent. And we do a lot of patent work in this space. And many people, when they sit down and really try to figure out what is and what's not patentable, they have a hard time doing it themselves because it's not clear what can be patented. But if you work with someone who does a lot of work in this space, you can kind of get a better sense of that. And I can tell you that patents can be incredibly powerful if you come up with really good ideas to at least slow down your competitors from copying what you're doing. Anyhow, those are just a few things. I'll be around if anyone's any questions. Thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Great, thank you very much, James. Right, now time for an afternoon break. We'll be back in the main stage at 4:30. Thanks for your time.